The scream tore through the silence of the lake house, sharp and raw, like glass shattering in my chest. I froze, my fingers tightening around the pen in my journal, the words I'd been scribbling blurring into meaningless ink. Somewhere inside, someone was hurting, and I, Julian Carter, the quiet intern who never spoke up, was about to stumble into a moment that would unravel my life. It was my first weekend at Mr. Harrington's lake house, a sprawling retreat nestled in the Adirondacks, where the air smelled of pine and freedom. I was 24, fresh out of college, and desperate to prove myself at Harrington and Company, a marketing firm in Manhattan where I'd landed a coveted internship. My boss, Richard Harrington, was a towering figure, polished, commanding, and impossibly hard to impress. When he invited the team for a bonding weekend at his family's lake house, I couldn't say no, even if the idea of socializing with my colleagues made my stomach churn. I was the kid from a small Ohio town, always out of place among the city's sharp-edged elite. But I packed my journal, my one constant companion, and drove upstate, hoping to blend into the background. The lake house was everything I wasn't: grand, confident, alive with history. Its wooden beams creaked with stories, and the floor-to-ceiling windows framed Lake Serenity like a painting. By Saturday afternoon, the team was scattered, some playing cards on the deck, others kayaking on the lake. I sat alone in a corner of the living room, sketching ideas for a campaign in my journal when the scream echoed from upstairs. Heads turned. Richard's voice boomed, calling for calm, but my heart raced as I followed the sound, drawn by instinct. Upstairs, in a dimly lit hallway, I found him, Ezra Harrington, Richard's son. I'd heard about him in passing, 26, a grad student in environmental science, rarely around. He was leaning against the wall, his broad shoulders hunched, his green eyes wet with tears. A shattered vase lay at his feet, and his hands trembled as he stared at the pieces. "Ezra," I said softly, my voice barely audible. He flinched, his gaze snapping to mine, raw and unguarded. For a moment, we just stood there, two strangers caught in a storm neither of us understood. "I'm fine," he muttered, wiping his face, but his voice cracked. I didn't believe him. I stepped closer, ignoring the broken porcelain crunching under my sneakers. "You don't look fine," I said, surprising myself with the words. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound, and shook his head. "You're Julian, right? The intern Dad's always talking about." I nodded, unsure why Richard would mention me. Ezra's eyes softened, like he saw something in me I didn't. "He says you're different. Quiet, but real." Before I could respond, Richard appeared, his face a mask of controlled frustration. "Ezra, enough. We have guests." His tone was sharp, and Ezra's jaw tightened. I wanted to say something, to defend him, but I stayed silent, as always. Richard ushered Ezra away, leaving me alone in the hallway, my journal clutched like a shield. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the spark, the beginning of a fire that would consume us both. The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced smiles and small talk. I kept stealing glances at Ezra, who stayed on the fringes, his easy charm masking something deeper. He was tall, with sun-kissed skin and a quiet intensity that made my chest ache. I'd never felt this before, not with anyone. Growing up in Ohio, I'd buried my feelings, convinced they were wrong, a sin whispered about in church. But here, in the open air of Lake Serenity, something in me stirred, reckless and alive. That night, as the team gathered around a bonfire, Ezra sat across from me, the flames casting shadows on his face. He caught my eye and smiled, a small, private thing that made my pulse race. "You're always writing in that journal," he said, his voice carrying over the crackling fire. "What's in it?" I hesitated, my fingers tracing the leather cover. "Just thoughts. Ideas." He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "I bet there's more to it than that." I swallowed hard, feeling exposed, but before I could answer, Richard called him over, and the moment broke. As the night wound down, I slipped away to the dock, needing air. The lake was a mirror, reflecting the stars and my own restless heart. I opened my journal, writing fragments of the day. Ezra's tears, his smile, the way his presence felt like a current pulling me under. I didn't hear him approach until he spoke. Couldn't sleep either? I jumped, nearly dropping my journal. Ezra stood at the edge of the dock, barefoot, his hands in his pockets. Mind if I join you? I nodded, and he sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his arm. We didn't speak for a while, just listened to the water lapping against the dock. Then he said, "I'm sorry about earlier. The vase, it was my mom's. She died when I was a kid." His voice was low, heavy with grief. I wanted to reach for him, to say something profound, but all I managed was, "I'm sorry." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "You don't talk much, do you? But I can tell you're listening. Really listening." The air between us felt charged, like a storm about to break. I wanted to tell him everything. How I'd spent years hiding who I was. How his presence made me question everything I'd been taught. But fear clamped my mouth shut. Instead, I handed him my journal, opened to a blank page. "Write something," I said, my voice shaky. He took the pen, his fingers brushing mine, and wrote one word: courage. He handed it back, his gaze steady. "That's for you," he said. And in that moment, I knew I was falling. Into him, into the unknown, into a truth I couldn't ignore. The next morning, the lake house buzzed with activity, colleagues laughing over coffee, Richard barking orders for a team-building hike. I lingered in the kitchen, my mind replaying last night's moment on the dock. Ezra's word, courage, burned in my journal, a challenge I wasn't sure I could meet. I'd spent my life avoiding risks, blending into the background, but his presence made me want to step into the light. Ezra appeared in the doorway, his hair mussed, wearing a faded flannel shirt that clung to his shoulders. "You joining the hike?" he asked, grabbing an apple from the counter. His casual tone didn't match the intensity in his eyes, like he was testing me. I shrugged, unsure how to navigate this pull between us. "Maybe," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He grinned, tossing the apple in the air. "Come on, Julian. Live a little." The hike was grueling, a steep climb through dense forest to a lookout over Lake Serenity. I trailed behind, my sneakers slipping on pine needles, my thoughts a tangle of nerves and longing. Ezra stayed close, pointing out wildflowers or cracking jokes to lighten the mood. When we reached the summit, the view stole my breath. Endless green hills rolling toward the horizon, the lake sparkling below. The team spread out, snapping photos, but Ezra pulled me aside, his hand grazing my elbow. "You see that?" he said, pointing to a distant ridge. "That's where I go when I need to think." "Alone?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Do you need to be alone a lot?" He looked at me, his expression softening. "Not always. Not right now." My heart stuttered, and I turned away, pretending to study the view. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I pulled out my journal, sketching the ridge he'd pointed to, its sharp lines a mirror of my own jagged emotions. Back at the lake house, the team gathered for dinner, but the tension from yesterday lingered. Richard dominated the conversation, his voice drowning out everyone else. Ezra sat across from me, picking at his food, his jaw tight every time his father spoke. I caught snippets of their dynamic. Richard's expectations, Ezra's quiet rebellion. When Richard mentioned Ezra's wasted potential in environmental science, I saw Ezra's hands clench under the table. Without thinking, I spoke up. "I think it's cool. Studying the environment, I mean. It's important." The table went quiet, and I felt every eye on me, including Richard's. Ezra's lips twitched into a smile, and for the first time, I felt seen, not as the quiet intern, but as someone who mattered. After dinner, I escaped to the porch, needing space from the noise. Ezra found me, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "You didn't have to do that," he said, handing me one. "Speak up for me." I shrugged, my cheeks warm. It was true. He sat beside me, our knees brushing. "You're not what I expected, Julian. Most people here just nod along with Dad." I stared into my mug, the steam curling like my thoughts. I'm not good at speaking up, I admitted. But you make it easier. He tilted his head, studying me. You're different, you know that? Like you're holding this whole world inside you, but you're scared to let it out. His words hit like a punch, stripping me bare. I wanted to tell him he was right, that I'd spent years hiding my truth, my attraction to men, my fear of being found out. But instead, I said, what about you? What's your world like? He leaned back, his eyes on the stars. Messy. I'm trying to figure out who I am without Dad's shadow. And other stuff. He hesitated, then added, like who I'm allowed to care about. My breath caught. Was he saying what I thought? Before I could ask, he stood, offering his hand. Come with me. I took it, his grip warm and steady, and he led me to the lake's edge. The water was dark, reflecting the moon like a secret. Ever skinny dipped? He asked, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I laughed, nervous. No way. He kicked off his shoes, grinning. First time for everything. My heart pounded as he stripped down to his boxers, his silhouette lit by moonlight. He didn't push me to join, just waded into the water, his laughter echoing. I stood frozen, torn between fear and desire, until something in me snapped. I shed my shirt and followed him, the cold water shocking my skin. We swam in silence, the lake embracing us like a confession. When we stopped, treading water, he was close, too close. His eyes locked on mine, and I felt the weight of everything unsaid. Why'd you come out here? He asked, his voice low. I swallowed, the truth clawing its way up. Because of you, I whispered. His lips parted, and for a moment, I thought he'd kiss me. But then he ducked under the water, leaving me alone with my racing heart. The cold water clung to my skin as I climbed onto the dock, shivering but alive in a way I'd never felt. Ezra emerged beside me, water dripping from his hair, his grin infectious. Told you it'd be fun, he said, tossing me a towel from a nearby bench. I wrapped it around myself, my heart still racing from the swim, and from the words I'd almost said. Because of you. They hung between us, unspoken but heavy, like the mist rising off the lake. We sat on the dock, our shoulders brushing, the night alive with crickets and possibility. You're braver than you think, Ezra said, his voice soft. I shook my head, staring at the water. I'm not. I've spent my whole life hiding. He turned to me, his eyes searching. Hiding what? My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him about the nights I'd lain awake in Ohio, praying to be someone else, someone who didn't feel this way. But fear stopped me, as always. Instead, I said, just stuff. You know. He didn't push, but his silence felt like an invitation, one I wasn't ready to accept. The next morning, the lake house felt different, charged, like the air before a storm. Richard announced a team-building exercise, a scavenger hunt around the property. I groaned inwardly, dreading the forced camaraderie, but Ezra's eyes lit up. You're on my team, he declared, pulling me aside before I could protest. The others paired off, leaving us to scour the woods for clues. As we trekked through the forest, Ezra's energy was contagious, his laughter cutting through my nerves. He pointed out a hidden trail, his hand brushing mine as he guided me. You ever feel like you're running from something? He asked, his tone casual, but his eyes serious. I hesitated, my journal heavy in my backpack. All the time, I admitted. Like I'm scared of who I might be if I stop. He stopped walking, turning to face me. Maybe you should stop. See what happens. His words hit hard, stirring something deep inside me. I wanted to tell him everything. How I'd grown up in a town where being gay was a whispered shame. How I'd moved to New York to escape, but still carried that fear. But before I could, he found the next clue, a carved wooden bird, and the moment passed. Back at the lake house, the team gathered to tally points, but I couldn't focus. Ezra's words echoed in my head, mingling with the memory of his touch. During lunch, I caught him watching me, his gaze steady and unreadable. When Richard stepped away to take a call, Ezra leaned across the table, his voice low. Meet me at the boathouse tonight. Midnight. My heart skipped. Why? I asked, my voice barely steady. He smirked, but his eyes were soft. You'll see. The rest of the day dragged. every minute heavy with anticipation. I tried to distract myself with work, sketching campaign ideas in my journal, but my thoughts kept drifting to Ezra. What did he want? Was I reading too much into his smiles, his touches? By the time midnight rolled around, I was a mess of nerves, sneaking out of the guest room and down to the boathouse. The lake was still, the moon casting a silver path across the water. Ezra was waiting, leaning against the boathouse door, a lantern at his feet. "You came," he said, his voice warm with relief. I nodded, clutching my journal like a lifeline. He pushed the door open, revealing a small wooden boat bobbing inside. "Get in," he said, climbing aboard. I hesitated, my fear of the unknown warring with my need to be near him. But I followed, settling beside him as he rowed us out onto the lake. The world felt quiet, just the creak of the oars and the ripple of water. "Why are we here?" I asked, my voice trembling. He stopped rowing, letting the boat drift. "Because I needed to be alone with you," he said simply. My breath caught. The lantern's glow lit his face, his green eyes steady and vulnerable. "Julian, I've been watching you all weekend. You're different. You see me, not just Richard Harrington's son. And I think—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I think I'm falling for you." The words hit like a wave, washing away my defenses. I wanted to say it back, to tell him I felt the same, but fear clawed at me. "Ezra, I faltered, my voice breaking. "I've never done this. I don't know how." He reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. "You don't have to know. Just be here. With me." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. He leaned closer, and I thought he'd kiss me. But instead, he pulled me into a hug, his arms strong and warm. I buried my face in his shoulder, letting the fear slip away, just for a moment. The boat rocked gently, the lake holding our secret, and I knew I'd never be the same. The boat drifted back to shore, but I felt like I was still floating, caught in the gravity of Ezra's confession. His arms around me had been a lifeline, pulling me from the shadows I'd lived in for so long. But as we stepped onto the dock, reality crept back in. The lake house loomed in the distance, its lights a reminder of the world waiting to judge us. Richard, the team, my own buried fears. I clutched my journal, its pages now a map of my unraveling heart. Ezra walked me back to the house, his hand brushing mine, a silent promise. "You okay?" he asked, pausing at the porch steps. I nodded, though my chest was tight with questions. The next day was Sunday, the final day of the retreat. The team was packing up, but I felt stuck, caught between the safety of silence and the pull of something new. Ezra was everywhere, helping with breakfast, joking with colleagues, stealing glances at me that made my heart race. I tried to focus on a final team meeting, presenting my campaign ideas to Richard, but my mind was on the lake, on Ezra's words. Richard praised my work, his rare approval a small victory, but it paled next to the memory of Ezra's arms around me. After the meeting, I found Ezra by the lake, skipping stones across the water. "You're good at that," I said, joining him. He handed me a flat stone, his fingers lingering on mine. "Takes practice. Like most things." I tried to skip it, but it sank with a plop. He laughed, and the sound warmed me. "You'll get it," he said, stepping closer. "You just need to let go." His words felt like more than advice about stones. They were about us, about me. We walked along the shore, the tension between us electric. "Last night," I started, my voice shaky. "What you said, I feel it too. But I'm scared." He stopped, turning to face me. "Of what?" I swallowed, the truth spilling out. "Of everything. My family, my job, what people will think. I grew up in a place where this wasn't okay." His eyes softened, and he took my hand. "I get it. I've been there. Dad still doesn't know about me. But you don't have to do this alone." His words cracked something open inside me. I told him about Ohio, about the church sermons that called people like me broken, about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, promising to change. He listened, his thumb tracing circles on my hand, and when I finished, he pulled me into another hug. "You're not broken, Julian," he whispered. "You're you. And that's enough." Tears fell, and I let them, feeling lighter than I ever had. But the moment was shattered by a voice. Richards. Ezra. Julian. We're leaving soon. We pulled apart, my heart pounding. Richard stood at the edge of the lawn, his eyes narrowing as he took in our closeness. Everything okay? He asked, his tone clipped. Ezra nodded, his jaw tight. Just talking, Dad. Richard's gaze lingered on me, and I felt exposed, like he could see every secret I'd tried to hide. He turned away, but the air felt heavier, charged with suspicion. Back at the house, I packed my bag, my mind racing. Ezra found me in the guest room, his expression tense. Dad's asking questions, he said, closing the door. He saw us by the lake. Panic gripped me. What did you say? Ezra sighed, running a hand through his hair. Nothing yet. But he's not stupid. He'll figure it out. I sank onto the bed, my journal falling open to the page with courage written in his handwriting. What do we do? I asked, my voice small. He knelt in front of me, his hands on my knees. We don't hide. Not anymore. His words were a challenge, but fear still gnawed at me. I'd spent years building walls, and tearing them down felt like stepping off a cliff. But Ezra's steady gaze gave me strength. Okay, I whispered. But slowly. He smiled, squeezing my hands. As slow as you need. We left the room together, his presence a shield against the world. As the team loaded into cars, Ezra pulled me aside. Come back next weekend, he said, his voice low. Just you. No team. I want to show you that ridge. My heart leapt, but doubt crept in. What about your dad? He shrugged, his grin defiant. We'll deal with him. Together. I nodded, a spark of courage igniting inside me. As I drove away, the lake house shrinking in my rearview mirror, I felt the weight of a new beginning, one I wasn't sure I was ready for, but one I couldn't turn away from. The week back in Manhattan was a blur of deadlines and doubt. At the office, I buried myself in work, but Ezra's face haunted me. His green eyes, his steady hands, the way he'd said together. My journal filled with sketches of the lake, of him, each line a confession I couldn't say aloud. I'd never felt this alive, but the fear of being found out, of losing my job, my place in this world, kept me up at night. Ezra texted me daily, small messages that felt like lifelines. Thinking of you. Can't wait for the weekend. Each one chipped away at my walls, but Richard's presence in the office loomed large. He watched me closely, his praise now tinged with scrutiny. On Thursday, he called me into his office. Julian, he said, leaning back in his chair, you did well at the retreat. But I need people I can trust. No distractions. His eyes bore into me, and I wondered if he knew. If he'd seen the truth in my closeness with Ezra. I nodded, mumbling agreement, and left, my heart pounding. By Friday, I was a wreck, torn between longing and fear. I almost canceled the trip back to the lake house, but Ezra's latest text, I need you here, tipped the scales. I packed a bag and drove upstate, the city fading into rolling hills. When I arrived, Ezra was waiting on the porch, his smile brighter than the afternoon sun. You made it, he said, pulling me into a hug. I melted into him, the world falling away. The lake house was quiet without the team, just Ezra and me. He led me to the kitchen, where he'd cooked dinner, pasta with homemade sauce, a bottle of wine on the table. Fancy, I teased, trying to hide my nerves. He laughed, pouring me a glass. Only the best for you. We ate, the conversation easy but charged, every glance a spark. After dinner, he took my hand. Ready for that ridge? We hiked through the woods, the trail steep and wild. Ezra moved with confidence, pointing out birds and plants, his passion for the environment lighting up his face. At the ridge, the view was breathtaking. Lake Serenity stretching below, framed by mountains. We sat on a flat rock, our shoulders touching. This is my place, Ezra said, his voice soft. Where I come to be me. I nodded, understanding. It's beautiful. He turned to me, his eyes intense. So are you. My breath caught, and before I could think, he kissed me. His lips were warm, urgent, and I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his hair. It was my first kiss. Raw, real, everything I'd been afraid to want. When we pulled apart, I was trembling, tears in my eyes. Ezra, he cupped my face, his thumb brushing my cheek. I know. It's okay. We kissed again, slower this time, the world narrowing to just us. But the moment was fleeting. As we hiked back, Ezra's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face paling. It's Dad. He's coming up tomorrow. My stomach dropped. Does he know? Ezra shook his head. Not yet, but he suspects something. Panic surged, but Ezra squeezed my hand. We'll face him. Together. That night, we slept in the same room, not touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth. I lay awake, my journal open to courage, Ezra's breathing steady beside me. I wanted to believe we could do this, but the weight of Richard's disapproval, of the world's judgment, pressed down on me. By morning, I was a bundle of nerves, but Ezra's smile steadied me. We've got this, he said, kissing my forehead. Richard arrived at noon, his SUV crunching on the gravel. He stepped out, his eyes narrowing as he saw us on the porch, our hands brushing. Julian, he said, his voice cold. Didn't expect you here. I froze, but Ezra stepped forward. I invited him, Dad. We need to talk. The air crackled with tension, and I knew the storm was coming. Richard's eyes flicked between us, sharp and unyielding, like he could see every secret we'd tried to keep. The porch felt too small, the lake house closing in around us. Ezra stood tall, his hand still brushing mine, a silent vow. Inside, Richard said, his voice a low command. We followed, my heart hammering, my journal tucked under my arm like armor. In the living room, Richard sat in a leather armchair, his presence filling the space. What's going on here? He asked, his gaze fixed on Ezra. I wanted to shrink away, to disappear, but Ezra's voice was steady. Dad, I'm gay, and I'm with Julian. The words landed like a thunderclap, reverberating in the silence. My breath caught, pride and fear warring inside me. Richard's face hardened, his jaw tight. You're confused, he said, his tone dismissive. This isn't who you are. Ezra's hands clenched, but he didn't back down. It's exactly who I am. And Julian's part of that. Richard's eyes snapped to me, and I felt exposed, like a kid caught breaking a rule. Julian, you're talented. Don't throw it away on this. His words stung, echoing every fear I'd carried from Ohio. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Ezra squeezed my hand, his voice fierce. He's not throwing anything away. He's choosing to live. The argument escalated, Richard's voice rising, Ezra pushing back. I stood frozen, my silence a betrayal. Finally, Richard stood, his face a mask of anger. You're making a mistake, Ezra, and you're dragging him down with you. He stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Ezra turned to me, his eyes wet but defiant. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to pull you into this. I shook my head, tears falling. No, I'm glad you did. I took his hand, my voice trembling but sure. I'm with you. We stood there, holding each other, the lake house quiet except for the echo of our breathing. For the first time, I felt the weight of my fear lifting, replaced by something stronger, love, raw and unapologetic. That afternoon, we walked to the lake, needing air. Ezra told me about his mom, how she'd loved this place, how he'd come out to her before she died. She told me to be brave, he said, his voice thick. I'm trying. I nodded, my own courage stirring. Me too. We waded into the water, not caring about our clothes, the cold shocking but freeing. He pulled me close, and we kissed, the lake holding us like a promise. But Richard's words lingered, a shadow over our joy. That night, I wrote in my journal, pouring out my fears, my hopes, my love for Ezra. When he found me, he read the pages, his eyes softening. You're braver than you know, he said, echoing his words from the dock. I smiled, believing it for the first time. The next morning, Richard returned, his expression softer but still guarded. I don't understand this, he said, sitting across from us. But you're my son. And Julian, you're part of this family now. It wasn't acceptance, not fully, but it was a start. Ezra squeezed my hand, and I felt a spark of hope, a future we could build together. The drive back to Manhattan was quiet, Ezra's hand resting on mine as the lake house faded behind us. We'd faced Richard, faced our fears, and though the road ahead was uncertain, we were together. My journal lay in my lap, its pages filled with a story I was finally ready to live. Back in the city, life moved fast, but Ezra and I carved out moments. Coffee shops, late-night walks, stolen kisses in Central Park. I came out to my team, my voice shaking but steady, and to my surprise, they supported me. Richard was distant but civil, his approval thawing slowly. I kept writing, my journal now a record of love, not fear. Months later, we returned to the lake house, just the two of us. We stood on the dock, the water reflecting a sky full of stars. Ezra took my hand, his eyes bright. "You took me into the water," he said, echoing the moment that changed everything. I smiled, pulling him close. "And you brought me to life." We kissed, the lake a witness to our love, our courage, our future. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, a story written in water and stars, a testament to the beauty of being true.